Thai army declares nationwide martial law. Washington accuses 5 Chinese military officers of cyber spying. And Xi Jinping meets Vladimir Putin in Shanghai.
Good evening. The army in Thailand declared martial law early this morning after 6 months of turbulent political unrest in the country. Troops have taken control of TV and radio stations, as well as power plants and water supply in Bangkok. The army chief has denied they are staging a military coup, but rather the action is to restore order. The caretaker government, meanwhile, is holding an emergency meeting at an undisclosed location. Jenny Lam begins our coverage.
The Thai army moved into the capital, Bangkok, at around 2 a.m. this morning. Soldiers took over both public and private television stations and ordered them to stop their regular programs and air live broadcasts from the army channels when asked. Declaring martial law on television at 3 a.m., Army Chief General Prayuth Chan-o-cha said the military was taking charge of public security because violent protests have claimed lives and caused damage. He has set up a so-called peacekeeping command center and invited all government chiefs to a meeting this afternoon. There is an eerie calm in Bangkok as soldiers stand guard at key intersections and set up roadblocks. Reports say the army has also taken control of water supplies and power plants, plus major rally venues around the capital. Both the pro- and anti-government camps have been warned to stay put. The anti-government People's Democratic Reform Committee has called off a rally planned for today, but one of its leaders said the martial law would have no effect on them and they are meeting to decide what they will do next. Reports say the caretaker government did not know about the martial law declaration beforehand. Acting Prime Minister Niwatomrong Bunsong Paisan has called an emergency cabinet meeting at an undisclosed location. The Justice Minister claimed the caretaker government is still running the country, though the army is now in charge of security. Today's development comes after nearly 30 people were killed since mass protests began in Bangkok in November last year. The leader of the pro-government Red Shirt movement has asked demonstrators not to oppose the army, but also vow to continue their rally. They say a general election is the only way to end the political stalemate. They added that if the military appoints a so-called neutral prime minister, as demanded by the anti-government camp, they will escalate their rally. The present round of political unrest in Thailand began earlier this month after the Constitutional Court ousted caretaker Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra and 9 cabinet ministers for abuse of power. Minister of Commerce Niwatomrong Bunsong Paisan then took over as acting Prime Minister. The opposition camp, though, questions his legitimacy and has called for his resignation. The acting Prime Minister refused to budge. He insists that according to the Constitution, he should continue to be in charge until a new government is formed. Jenny Lam, TVB News.
Here in Hong Kong, the government has not ruled out raising the travel alert for Thailand if the situation there gets worse. Some Hong Kong people who live in Bangkok believe military involvement will help resolve the political turmoil. Joan De Silva with that story.
Life goes on as usual in Bangkok after the army declared martial law, according to a Hong Kong man in the Thai capital who talked to TVB News over the phone. The only inconvenience so far is worsening traffic jams because of checkpoints set up by the army. He said many businesses in Bangkok welcome the army's involvement because the political turmoil has affected Thailand's economy. The opposition camp, he believes, will now have to think twice before staging mass protests. The director of the Institute of Security and International Studies at Bangkok's Chulalongkorn University says it all depends if the public sees the army as favouring one side over the other. And if that's the case, he fears more turmoil is likely. Here in Hong Kong, business travellers and holiday makers continue to set off for Thailand today. This man says he will leave early or go to Cambodia if violence breaks out. According to the Travel Industry Council, there are more than 20 Hong Kong tour groups in Thailand, amounting to around 500 people. 7 to 8 tour groups departed for Bangkok today. Secretary for Security Lai Chun-kwok said the government is in touch with the Chinese embassy in Bangkok to assess the situation. He advises Hong Kong people in Thailand to avoid crowded places and protests. The travel alert for Thailand remains at amber for the time being, but the government has not excluded the possibility of raising the alert should the situation deteriorate.
如果佢查實咗你因為
Paul Law, the president of the International Professional Insurance Consulting Association, warns both those planning to travel to Thailand and those who are already there that most travel insurance plans do not cover injuries or losses caused by riots or armed strife. In fact, most plans will clearly stipulate that travelers should avoid visiting places where such incidents are likely to take place. Hong Kong people in need of help in Thailand can call the Immigration Department hotline on 852-1868 or contact the Chinese embassy there. Joan De Silva, TVB News.
On to other news now, and China has denounced the US charges against 5 military officers who are accused of hacking into American companies to steal trade secrets. Beijing says Washington is guilty of spying on other countries and accused America of hypocrisy and double standards. The United States is standing by its decision to charge 5 Chinese military officers with committing high-profile cyber crimes against America. The group, who are allegedly members of the PLA Cyber Espionage Unit 61398, are accused of hacking into American metal, nuclear and solar energy companies to steal classified trade information.
This administration will not tolerate actions by any nation that seeks to illegally sabotage American companies and undermine the integrity of fair competition in the operation of the free market.
It's unlikely the 5 will be handed over to US authorities, given Beijing's anger at the decision and the Foreign Ministry's showdown with the US ambassador on the issue. China warned the US it will take retaliatory action and says it's sheer hypocrisy given the revelations leaked by former security analyst Edward Snowden about the extent of American spying activity around the world.
The Chinese have basically 2 responses. One is, we're not spying on you, we don't hack you. And the second one is, in fact, you guys are the biggest hacking empire in the world. We've seen through the Snowden revelations that you are constantly hacking into other countries' networks.
It's the first criminal hacking charge that the US has filed against specific foreign officials. Justice Department officials feel the action is justified, given the scale of the alleged hacking operation.
If you look at security reports from a number of private companies and from the US government, we're talking about hundreds, if not thousands, of US companies. So it's much, much broader. But what we seem to see is that the Chinese have targeted a number of industrial sectors that they think are incredibly important to their economy.
The indictment is likely to further strain relations. Besides hacking, Washington and Beijing have argued over issues such as human rights, trade concerns, currency valuation, and China's growing assertiveness in territorial disputes with its neighbours. And staying on the issue of cybersecurity, US authorities are warning against a new piece of malicious software which lets hackers remotely hijack a computer and its webcam. US authorities in New York, who announced they were launching a global operation, say more than 500,000 computers in over 100 countries have been infected by the sophisticated malware. 97 people suspected of using or distributing the malware called Black Shades have been arrested in 16 countries, including the software's owner, a 24-year-old Swedish man. More than 3,000 Chinese citizens evacuated from Vietnam by sea have arrived on Hainan Island. China dispatched 4 ships to Vietnam after deadly unrest broke out last week amid a territorial dispute over waters claimed by both countries in the South China Sea. The latest round erupted May 1st when Beijing deployed a large oil rig close to the Paracel Islands. Hanoi immediately sent ships to confront the rig. They are now locked in a standoff with Chinese ships protecting the rig, raising fears of a possible conflict.
Russian President Vladimir Putin is in Shanghai for a 2-day summit on Asian security cooperation. Putin is hoping to strengthen alliances in Asia as Russia faces increasingly diplomatic isolation in the West over the crisis in Ukraine. James Aiken reports.
It was a warm Chinese reception for a Russian friend at a time when Russia needs a good friend. This is Russian President Vladimir Putin's first China visit since President Xi Jinping took office, and the second meeting between the two leaders this year. Putin is in Shanghai for a security summit, but he also wants to do business. Aside from a series of bilateral cooperation agreements, hopes are high in Moscow to clinch a long-term multi-billion-dollar sale on Russian natural gas to China. The deal, which would pipe Siberian gas to China's northeast, has been held up for years over pricing. Now it could be signed soon. There is growing urgency for Moscow to seal the deal as Russia faces pressure to diversify export routes away from Europe over the crisis in Ukraine. China needs energy and is highly motivated to transition from coal to cleaner fuels. But with European gas customers looking to reduce dependence on Russian gas, Beijing is expected to drive a hard bargain on price and concessions. Those concessions could include Russia lifting restrictions on Chinese investment and on exports of military technology. Xi and Putin are among several leaders attending the Security Cooperation Summit in Shanghai. Prior to his visit, the Russian leader called China a reliable friend. And while Xi has also underscored the importance of ties with Russia, there is lingering uneasiness with Russia's actions in Ukraine. China generally holds a diplomatic policy of non-interference and is reluctant to recognize the right to self-determination for groups like the pro-Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine. Xi and Putin have also kicked off the week-long Joint Sea 2014 naval drill in the East China Sea. The naval exercise is part of a Sino-Russian strategic partnership that includes political, economic, and military ties aimed at counterbalancing U.S. influence. James Aiken, TVB News.
Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki is close to winning a third term. His Shiite-dominated political bloc won the largest share of seats in the country's first parliamentary elections since the U.S. military withdrawal in 2011. Preliminary results show al-Maliki won at least 93 seats, far more than his two main Shiite rivals. This deals a blow to Shiite, Sunni and Kurdish rivals who opposed his serving a third term. Al-Maliki is waging a war with armed Sunni groups that hold territory in war-torn Syria and have influence around central Iraq. Final results are expected in a few weeks after Iraq's Electoral Commission rules on complaints of voter fraud and irregularities. The federal court then certifies the results. And still ahead in our news. A call on the public to speak out against the budget filibuster. A new development plan for southern Yunlong. And amended charges against a former employer of Ariana.